Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I invite my colleague Nadeem Gilani to recite a few verses from the Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض الملك القدوس العزيز الحكيم هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين وآخرين منهم لما يلحقوا بهم وهو العزيز الحكيم ذلك فضل الله يؤتيه من يشاء والله ذو الفضل العظيم. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. All that is in the heavens and all that is in the earth extols the glory of Allah, the Sovereign, the Holy, the Almighty, the All-Wise. He it is who has sent to the Gentiles a messenger from among themselves, one who rehearses to them his verses, purifies their lives, and imparts to them the book and the wisdom, although before that they were in utter error. And he has also sent him to those others who have not yet joined them. He is the most mighty and the most wise. Such is Allah's favor. He bestows it on whomsoever He pleases. Allah is the Lord of abounding favor. Sadaqallahu al-Azim.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I welcome all of you to this morning session on challenges to Pakistan's nuclear program and Fmct. I'm sorry that we are starting a little late, but that is today one of the costs of being so close to the red zone. Many of our guests have come late because of this reason. Most of you might be aware that the Conference on Disarmament, which is the single multilateral disarmament negotiating forum of the international community, comprising 65 member states, would be commencing its next session from the 24th of this month. Cessation of the nuclear arms race and arms race in outer space, nuclear disarmament and prevention of nuclear war and new types of weapons of mass destruction, as well as effective international arrangements to guarantee the non-nuclear weapon states about impeding the use of threat of use of nuclear weapons, and comprehensive program of disarmament and transparency in armaments are at present the issues on which the conference is primarily paying its attention. Fmct, the Fissile Material Cutoff Treaty, has remained a major item on the agenda of the conference since long, though it has not been successful in negotiating it until now. A major reason in this regard is that the decisions in the conference are made by consensus, and therefore every member has the right to veto and consequently the right to halt negotiations if it believes that its national interests are threatened. In this backdrop, the UN General Assembly's First Committee on Disarmament, held in October last year, concluded with a number of important developments which would in the coming weeks also influence and shape the agenda and proceedings of the conference. Pakistan has been one of the active members of the Conference on Disarmament, and while there are a number of countries that may be called responsible for stalling the Fmct process in the past, some quarters blame Pakistan for halting the talks on Fmct owing to its persistence on its stance over it. Keeping this in view, the position of Pakistan is once again expected to be in focus during the conference. It is in this background that we are meeting today. You might have noted that the panel of speakers that we had originally announced has been slightly changed. We now have in our panel General Asad Durrani, Dr. Nawaz, Zafar Nawaz Jaspal, and Ambassador Tariq Osman Hyder. While no specific topics have been allocated to these speakers, all of them will have their particular focus. General Durrani has been requested to dilate upon the context in which Pakistan is pursuing its nuclear program, its command and control authority, questions about the safety and security and other similar issues of Pakistan's nuclear program, which form the basis of its stand on Fmct. Dr. Jaspal would speak on the expected debate in the coming Conference on Disarmament in the backdrop of the first Committee on Disarmament's decisions and opportunities and pressures on Pakistan in the wake of these decisions, while Ambassador Hyder would be taking up the questions about Pakistan's strategies, chances of its success in the conference, and implications of failure or success for both Pakistan and rest of the world. And finally, how best, in his view, can Pakistan achieve its objectives. In the chair is Professor Khurshid Ahmed, and we shall be following the same order as I have noted. And I request now Professor Khurshid Ahmed to kindly take over the proceedings.
My very dear respected panelists, distinguished participants, friends, colleagues, brothers and sisters. IPS from its very inception has tried to address major security issues, naturally in the context of Pakistan's needs and aspirations, the region, South Asia, Muslim world, and of course the global context. Over a dozen seminars, conferences have been organized on related subjects, and several of our publications deal in depth with different aspects of this issue. Today's seminar represents an effort to once again reflect on these issues in the context of the coming conference. While proliferation has been focused as perhaps the most important issue, I would humbly submit the real issue is disarmament. Even the NPT, its primary objective was not to protect the monopoly of the then atomic weapon power states, although their position was recognized, an effort was made to proliferation, but the ultimate objective was to free the world from nuclear weapons, and also to ensure that the nuclear technology, while the weapon use has to be contained or scuttled, its use for peaceful purposes is a need of the humanity, and we have to differentiate between the two. Containing, controlling, and eliminating one, on the other promoting and helping all countries to go for peaceful use of the nuclear energy, as is the case with any other source of energy or power. Focus has shifted. The core problem is being ignored, and all the efforts are focused on these peripheral issues, primarily because of the power politics. And if power politics is the name of the game, then of course, if security is important for X country, how can it be denied to Y country or Z country? This discrimination definitely lies at the root of many of our problems. The consensus principle built into this conference and some other similar forums primarily is not to resort to veto, but the objective is to move towards consensus by give and take, by being sympathetic to not merely the concerns of the powerful, but also the less powerful. And that again is something which is being neglected. Pakistan sometimes is scolded, demonized for a stand which is dictated by its interests, but also something that has its basis in justice and right of all people to security, not a more exceptionalist or monopolistic approach to this issue. So I think it is this context the conference is taking place. Pakistan has taken a principled, consistent stand despite all the pressures from different directions. A qualitative change, however, has taken place because of the Indo-US nuclear deal, because of which the whole balance has been fundamentally altered in the region. And in that context, Pakistan's need to continue its principled position on fissile material cut-off treaty, in my view, is something extremely important, and that is the reason why we have tried to address this issue. And I am happy to say that on the panel we have three eminent persons who have in-depth knowledge, exposure to the issues involved, and we look forward to a very illuminating discussion on this subject. With these introductory words, I would first of all request my dear brother and colleague, Lieutenant General Asad Durrani, to make his presentation. General Durrani.
I think today's event has been very well structured. I'm not sure about my expertise, but the diplomat that we have on the panel is someone who has been involved in this game for a long, long time. No one better than Ambassador Tariq Osman Hyder to talk about it. Dr. Zafar Jaspal, I've heard him very often. His knowledge, technical knowledge is very good. Mercifully, I have not been asked to say something very substantial. The idea was to just present a broad framework of the challenges to our, and I'm assuming we are talking about our nuclear weapons program, and then leave the the nitty-gritty, the substantial part, the technical thing, to the other two speakers. So in that case, my job is not too complicated. In fact, sometimes I have the impression, or people do tell me that while talking about these subjects, I tend to oversimplify matters. I do not know why. Maybe one does not understand the complexities. But this is how I see 4 major challenges to our nuclear program. The first one, about which there is always so much of hue and cry, I find that's a reasonably simple challenge to meet. Or if not simple, at least the framework is very clear. The physical safety of our weapons, installations, etc., etc. Now, as a former soldier, my reaction is, so what is so complex about it? All that you have to do is have good intelligence, provide physical security, the army, the police, the frontier corps, the other guards, disperse them well, and bury them deep. So what's the idea? What's the problem? Why are we always saying, are they safe, are they not safe? In question answer session, someone should try and point out that. And just in case I've missed a point, I did talk about intelligence, and that takes care also of the personnel involved. How do you scrutinize them? Are they divulging intelligence, etc., etc.? I mean, this is a game that I suppose anyone should know how to play. Whether we play it well or not, that's quite a different thing. But the framework is not too complex to define. Because what is the threat as far as that part is concerned, the physical security? Sabotage, subversion, aerial or ground, commando raids, Osama bin Laden, oh God. Now it's becoming a little more complex. But that is what one does. There's only one thing that I'm not quite sure how far we are, how far we have taken cognizance of. When we talk about high technological threat, electronic warfare, electronic means to destroy them, for the world of me, I do not know if there are such means available anywhere which can be employed, and despite everything that we have done, can pierce through all the underground pens and bunkers and igloos and go and make these things inoperative. I do not know about that. If there are people who are concerned with that, they must be knowing it. So except for that, as I said, this particular threat is no big deal, as we say. Dispersion, I must emphasize, is important, and that takes care of it. A big problem. Even if someone had all those means that I'm talking about that I may not know. The problem for such people or such forces would be, we do not know where all the weapons are, what installations are there, how deeply they are buried. But let's say we find out about 80 or 90% of them, and we take action against them. Some of them might still survive. Of course, the ones that you do not know still survive. So there is also an inbuilt safety in the this nuclear related programs. The other is a little bigger challenge, and that is how effective is our deterrence? And that is threat related. Are we talking about threat from India, or are we talking about threat from the United States? So depending on that, the challenge is to ensure that your program, your deterrence remains relevant to the threat. If there is a very high-tech threat, as I said, well, one will have to find out if our deterrence, our capabilities are up to it or not. And that is where someone like me would simply talk about 2 or 3 things. The FMCT part, one would leave to the other experts. What do we do under such circumstances to ensure that it remains relevant? The development, it's not a number game, but the development, the technological development is in the direction of miniaturization of warheads, delivery means, so that they can either not be detected so very well, or they can pierce through the defenses. So far, whatever I know about the ballistic missile defense, it is one of the most ineffective means to deter nuclear employment. It's not like conventional means, where out of 90 missiles, if you stopped 80, you are 80% successful. Here, out of 100, if you are 90% successful and 10 have gone through, the deterrence, the defense has failed, because one of them might land, God forbid, on a very important place. One is not, one just symbolically taking the name of Delhi, Agra, Islamabad, Ralana, but does not mean anything. But that is the limitation of the BMD as it exists today. However, the people who have to take care of that, they will be thinking about the technical aspect, the technological one, the future development and so on. And even if it happens now, who is going to surround a country like India with all the BMD systems? What will happen? What will you do against the seaborne nuclear threats? So that is not one very big problem. The problem is, what I said, my colleagues will talk about that. It's getting more complex. The third one is our deterrence credible? Credibility is not about how many weapons we have and how many the other side may have. And whenever we talk about the number and people try and implore, it's not a number game, but we insist that if it is 200 there or 300 there, what would be the minimum? To me, that's not an important thing. The credibility of nuclear deterrence lies in psychological, in political field. On the one hand, and let's be very clear, we may be very proud of this is one thing which provides us some sort of confidence, a psychological thing to start with, that we have that ability. Aren't we all also absolutely convinced that we have to prevent by all means their actual use? Actual use is, well, something that probably will be used, and after that, you, me, and so many others might not be in a position to use anything for the next, I do not know, 50 years, 100 years. So you're trying to avoid it, you're trying to prevent it, but at the same time, the credibility of deterrence only exists if the other side believes that you had the will to use it. It's a very complex game, ladies and gentlemen. It, as I said, it lies in the domain of doctrinal employment. I don't think we want to go into that right now. Psychological, we all understand. But the political part, how does the national leadership prepare the country that, look, we will try everything possible, but at the same time, just in case it happened, and if there was a need, we'll be prepared to make that, I do not know if it should be called the ultimate sacrifice, a very big sacrifice, and all that preparation. So that is in the political field. The last challenge, the viable state. Let's just pause it. And God forbid, I am not suggesting anything to defang the nuclear program of Pakistan. But if I were given this task, with all the knowledge that one has, and one was to say, what are the best means to ensure that this country, this so-called rogue country, gets rid of these weapons, because it sometimes threatens, sometimes it takes, cover behind it, sometimes immunity. How do we go about doing it? Ladies and gentlemen, my suggestion will be to such a power, ensure that Pakistan does not remain a viable state. Either there is an economic meltdown in this country, and then we'll say, well, the price of bailout is this. One very effective way, if that happens. And the other one is, and exploit all possible fault lines in this country, and there are a number of them, ethnic, political, ideological, what have you. exploit them so that it becomes in a state, a fractured state, a divided one, where its security forces or the country as such is not capable of defending that, because otherwise we are absolutely quite all right. I'm sure the armed forces and all the other security operators can take care of that. And I've said what immunity it has against the normal action. But against this, remember Soviet Union? After it fell apart, some of its components, number one, had to forego this capability, had to give up that, were removed, defanged or denuclearized, de-armed. Some of them also got stolen. Some of them were also sold. Now that is the aim that an enemy of this country would be heading for. What is the state today? And I'm not suggesting, because then one, may be branded as conspiracy theorist. Is it by design? Or is it happening by default because we ourselves have not been able to come up to that? That, ladies and gentlemen, is the framework in which we have to now think about what are the other challenges that we are faced with. Thank you very much. Grateful.
Thank you, Mr. Durrani. As expected, despite your humble beginning, you have set the agenda for our discussion. Definitely different technical issues would be addressed, but the real value of the weapons is deterrence. And as you have rightly suggested, it's not a static concept. That's why development is an integral part of maintenance and whatever has been achieved. But to keep it relevant and the sanguineness of the state, the country as such, so that this extremely dangerous, and as you have rightly said, its utility lies in its presence but non-use. That makes the whole thing politically important to manage. And that is an area we cannot ignore. Thank you very much indeed. May I now request Dr. Zafar Nawaz to make his presentation.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Senator Khurshid, Dr. Rahman, General Saab, Ambassador Saab, and respected colleagues as well as participants. I will be going to flag a few important issues in which this Conference of Disarmament debate will be starting and what will be the construct. So in that context, when we look about these things, we will be in a position to proper analyze the situation. As you all know, the first session of 2012 Conference of Disarmament will be starting on 23rd January, and in that first session, which will end on 30th March, number of the things will be taking place. But in the international and national media, Pakistan will be remain a focal state. The focus on the Pakistan would be because of 4 reasons. First reason is it's a nuclear weapon state, and it's an established fact. Its nuclear weapons program has been growing, improving. Though it's not only a state, but when we review the international literature, we find every state which has a nuclear capability, it has been improving its nuclear weapons capability, whether it's a device or a delivery. And the best example of it is the basic report which was written by Trident Commission in Britain and Americans with the Americans and British coordination, published in 2011 November. it has confirmed this thing. The trend is that quality is improving, quantity is controlled. So numerically you can say some control. Second important thing is that Pakistan's straightforward stance within the Conference of Disarmament on number of the issues. It had affirmative stance on PAROS, prevention of arms race in outer space. It has an affirmative stance on nuclear disarmament. It has affirmative stance on negative security assurances. It has negative or it has contradictory stance on fissile material cutoff treaty. Pakistan's stances is very interesting. Is first, and I only flagged 4 out of 8 2011 item agendas of the Conference of Disarmament. So these are 4 core items. And when we look about these 4 core items, Americans-led world as well as its allies in Asia all have a negative stance on the first 4 which I highlighted, and they have some kind of positive impression on the Fmct. Third important reason could be the biased, baseless, irrational propaganda against Pakistan's nuclear weapons program. Every day when I look the newspapers, I find a story or a number of stories on the subject. It is very important, the narrative which we have been listening, that is very much misconstructed. In this baseless facts, I have to admit, even within Pakistan, the Pakistani analysts, Pakistani writers, I mean my own community, academics, they are also simply relying on the Western narrative on the Pakistan's nuclear weapons program. I can simply here highlight one issue. Everyone says that Pakistan built its nuclear program due to the Afghan war in 1980s. But no one tried to see the dates. Our coordination with Afghanistan, with the Americans started in 1980 when Reagan came into power. First bill went into the US Congress, in which they gave the waiver in Symington-Glenn Amendment for 6 years and stringent or make more stricter Glenn Amendment sanctions or review. And the aid process started somewhere in 1982. Pakistan did its cold test in March 1983. So after that, so how you can say that it was during that, or that war was benign for us for our nuclear program? So these kind of the narratives, we have to look into it. And there are certain, you can find it again and again when they repeat, you find that something is becoming true. So that basis propaganda always generate impression. Then of course, as Asad Durrani has also slightly referred, our internal situation, which is not a part of this discussion. So now I'm moving on the second part of my discussion, that the CD or Conference of Disarmament debate will be revolving, or you will find again 4 to 5 important guiding principles. I can say the constructs of the 2012 CD agenda or debate. Agenda will remain the same, more or less, but it will revolve around that. First will be the report which the CD presented to the first committee after its completion on 15 September 2011. In that report, there was a signaling that CD has failed to perform, so we should act out of this forum, especially on fissile material cutoff treaty. Impression was given that it could be negotiated within the General Assembly. And that was a blackmailing tactic, that if Pakistan or its like-minded states are not on the board or they are opposing, because in the CD you have a veto vote, then why not we can come up with the outer side. So here we have to also be very careful, because I heard a number of the Pakistani analysts, including the Western analysts, that they generate an impression that something has gone out of the CDN in the General Assembly, then Pakistan will be in a difficult situation. Frankly speaking, when we critically analyze the fissile material or these kind of the treaties, only 8 to 10 states matter. Because if you see the world into 4 layers, first, nuclear weapon states. They have already committed in Article 6 that they will going to disarm, but they are not implementing. Nothing is going to influence them. First, P5. Then we have a 2 tested nuclear weapon state, or 3, India, Pakistan, North Korea, which are not part of the NPT. And then we have Israel, which is not part of the NPT. Remaining all the states in the world has committed under the Article 2 of the NPT, because all of them are party to the NPT, that they will not develop fissile material by which they can make the nuclear weapons. So it matters only for these states. And within that states, if one is out of the club, so what I think it will be useless activity. That is number one thing which we have to take into account. And we'll be very confident on this, but you will be going to see a lot of, you can say, alarming kind of the literature or perceptions on this issue. The second construct will be, that is, prevention of an arms race in outer space. It's correct that missile defense system could not provide you foolproof security or a defense. I agree with the General Durrani's perception. But here is also another important thing, that in this context, Americans have realized that missile defense system cannot work, but the technological evolution is moving and inching towards the 4th medium of warfare, that is a space weaponization, space warfare. Interestingly, there is not even a single treaty which prevent the conventional defensive weapons deployment in the space. And that's the reason that PAROV was introduced in 1980s. But no consensus has come over this. In that context, the signaling factories, Americans tested in April 2010, X-37B satellite, and which is defined by the international, you can say, scientists, that it is a missile bed space vehicle in the space. So their interceptors would be in the space. Deployment will be there, and it will shorten the distance for the interceptor to hit in the boost phase of the striking missile. Because in the boost phase, the missile speed is slow, target is higher. It further facilitates to target in the pre-launch situation of the missile. So maybe in the mid-course or re-entry level, it has lesser impact, but on these two has more impact. At the same time, the Americans will be deploying further, and the debate will be going to, I think, become more clearer in March, when the Russians will go for their presidential election. If Putin will succeed and able to establish his political legitimacy within that Russian Federation, certainly there would be more debate on this issue, because they had already alarmed the West that we will be going to denounce new or a third START treaty, which we call it New START Treaty, entered into force in February 2011. If the Americans did not stop their missile defense program, because recently I was reading they have deployed something in the Turkey as well. So the third important thing will be shaping the nuclear weapons' inevitability in the strategic calculation of the nuclear weapon states. Every state is talking about it. As I pointed out earlier, NPT Article 6 will be not receiving any attention. It was the main article which was a bargain between the non-nuclear weapon states and nuclear weapon states in 1960s. Similarly, we have been also seeing that from the NPT, one state, North Korea, moved out. It utilized the withdrawal clause. I'm not sure what the Iranians will be going to do if they can use the withdrawal clause, give 3 months notice, and make a nuclear weapon. There will be a different trend. Then you will have a inline number of the other Arab states. But here the biggest point is, or the most important point is, that Israel's nuclear weapons program, which is the biggest hindrance in the way for a nuclear weapon free zone establishment in Middle East, that will be definitely attracting a lot of attention. The final important thing when we look about this CD constructs, that will be that how it will be looking or addressing the regional security architectures. And that is very much deterministic factor for us. For instance, when we look about the regional security architectures, if you look on your own region, our strategic environment's complexity has been multiplying with every day. There are a number of the reasons. For instance, first reason is that this American's policy to assist India's rise as a great power to check the China. But in that context, we find that they have an Indo-US nuclear deal, they have a space treaties, space program or assistance treaties with the India, and encouraging it. That encouragement definitely, when India's technical level of a strategy changes with the introduction of new doctrines, with the introduction of new weapons, certainly it multiplies the complexity within the regional strategic, in the strategic environment. And here I think Pakistani decision makers cannot ignore what we look at this India's encircling policy, having defense pact with Iran, having strategic partnership with Kabul, developing roads and rail links, bypassing Pakistan from Chabahar to the Afghanistan. Whether these things will be successful or not, but it generates some kind of strategic anxiety. And that strategic anxiety will be also linked with your nuclear policy making. Similarly, in the Middle East, I have already said, if you look on the Southeast Asia, the more you isolate the North Korea, the more the things will be disturbed. And in the Southeast Asia, the strategic, what we call a chessboard, already has set between the Americans and the Chinese. Americans have been looking at the China's this pearl string strategy very cautiously. In the European context, when we move in the security architecture, we find it not even a single NATO member state is ready to comply with the Article 2 of the NPT. They are still enjoying the nuclear security umbrella. If you read the NATO's 2020 program, you will find it that what is the significance they have attached to the nuclear weapons. So by that way, I can find not even a single region in the world where you find any sort of sportive element to this nuclear armament or these kind of the things. Now I can highlight my third part of the presentation. I have certain caveats in that context. And when I look about these certain caveats, my point is that where or how we are going to look into it. First caveat is there's an overwhelming, you can say, situation or overwhelming group who have been talking about that Pakistan should try to negotiate enter into negotiations, but they fail to understand that in 2005 to 2008, when Pakistan adopted, I think, a pathetic approach, you can call it, a silent approach on the Indo-US nuclear deal, what we got? Nothing. Strategic matters are very sensitive. You have to be proactive. Here people say that some states are hiding behind you. If you enter in a negotiation, tomorrow the other states will be going to start opposing it. The point here is that I should look my interest, not the others. In my interest today is that I should avoid any arrangement which limit my fissile material. Why do I enter on it? Second important thing is that they say that world, all of you know it, treaties are negotiated for win-win situation, not for win-lose situation. If we enter in Fmct, which will be the biggest pressure, and Ambassador will be highlighting further, my understanding in this context is that what we are getting out of it, some big clap, and at the end, limitation, not able to move ahead. Third is that some people limit it with the concept of minimum deterrence. Every time they say that for minimum deterrence, you can avoid numerical increase. Yes, you could avoid. But minimum deterrence, frankly speaking, is intangible factor, undefinable factor. Every day it is changing. With the cold start on the other side, at the same time, on the new purchases on the eastern side, if you start thinking that your minimum deterrence will remain or it qualified, which you have decided 10 years back, it's a wrong perception. Especially in an age or in a region where the state or your adversary is not ready to talk with you, even on nuclear restraint regime proposal, or where there is absence of comprehensive arms control arrangement. So if there is no arms control arrangement between the two belligerent states, their weapons will be certainly increasing. So minimum deterrence demands will be changing. Finally, I can once again come back to this point that Paros, Indians have missile defense program. Indians vetoed Paros in 2005. Indians have assurances from the Americans to receive assistance in the context of their missile defense development program. For instance, they received aero missile technology from Israel, which is Patriot Pack 2. I do agree here that missile defense system maybe not provide them foolproof security, as I said earlier. But when we analyze this or apply the theoretical literature of strategic culture, we say that something creates troubles. Deterrence is based on the rationality of the others. Deterrence needs capabilities, credibility, that you are able to not only able to retaliate, but inflict unacceptable damage. And for that, you have to be very careful. In a conclusion, I can submit that when we talk about strategic issues, when we talk about these kind of the debates, we have to be very careful and be realistic about the adversary's capabilities. We have to properly analyze the strategic environment. And in that context, the policies should be chalked out realistically, pragmatically. Obviously, they are not acceptable to the pacifist or idle school of thought. We have to construct our policies for us, whether they suit somebody or not. So in that context, I can stop here and try to answer your questions in the question and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nawaz.
You have done a very good job by focusing our attention
on the issues that are going to be faced in the coming conference and the vital interests, strategic interests of Pakistan, how they have to be safeguarded and not to be influenced or coaxed by the Western narrative. Also the discrimination that originally was built into the whole idea of keeping nuclear weapon capacity confined to the 5 nuclear states of that time. Then the discrimination which Israel has enjoyed throughout this period, as if that does not come into the threat perception for the region. And finally, the latest discrimination inflicted particularly upon us because of the Indo-US agreement. And we have very rightly emphasized that the minimum deterrence is not a static concept. It has to be a very dynamic concept. Of course, not simply a nuclear race, but definitely an effort that your deterrence remains relevant. For that, of course, development within and perception of the changing threats. Both are extremely important. Thank you very much for focusing on all these issues. Now it's my pleasure to invite my dear friend, Ambassador Tariq, to make his presentation. And we all know what contribution he has been making, along with in other areas, particularly in field of nuclear policy of Pakistan and its defense, its exposition and articulation at the diplomatic level. We look forward to a thoughtful presentation. Please take it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Khurshid Saab. Senator Khurshid, I'll keep my eye on the clock, having my 20 minutes allocated. In one respect, there's very little to say because General Durrani has already very lucidly spelt out some of the very major issues and considerations, and my friend Professor Jaspal has also given a very broad overview. Nonetheless, I would like to talk on 2 issues basically here. What are our main challenges, and then on the FMCT, what is the history out there, how we should deal with it, and then I think perhaps most importantly, what are the recommendations and conclusions that we as the seminar should have. I think that is the perhaps also a thing which is of some importance. I think now it's over a decade since we've become a nuclear power, and it's always good to review this matter from time to time. We had no choice when we went there. We had to redress the strategic balance when India went nuclear. I think we have before us, the example of our disintegration, despite our own faults, in 1971 at the hands of India, one of the first major countries to have been disintegrated like that, or divided in a sense. But then we saw that after the nuclear capability, with the Indian coercive build-up in 2000-2001, the fact that we had this capability, we were able to withstand that. At the same time, we have to, of course, realize and be conscious that having nuclear weapons, it has an overriding national and international responsibility to assure that these weapons, technology, materials are safe and under good operational control, and that we will only use them to deter in extremis necessity. And in other words, every nuclear state, and we as one is now, has to show that it's a responsible state, and it's a continuing process. I would just very briefly mention in my mind what are the main challenges that we face at the national and international level. One is that global concerns about the safety and security of our nuclear assets. I think General Durrani has dealt with this to a large extent. I won't go into all our safe custodial controls. We have the National Command Authority. We have a very strong command and control system. Unlike Western and other developed countries, we are able to deploy more armed forces or especially dedicated armed forces to guard our nuclear assets because the costs of personnel are much less. And of course, we have the SPD as the secretariat of the NCA, its security division, etc. I want to make one point here that a lot of the criticism that's made of Pakistan is motivated and biased, and either we have to ignore it or we have to rebut it. But then there are other criticisms which are perhaps based on misperceptions. And we don't need to have knee-jerk reactions. We should rationally analyze these criticisms, and we should try to engage to remove them. And I think the Foreign Office and even the SPD and others, we've been trying to do this, but we can certainly do more. The second thing is the internal public concerns that the prioritization of scarce resources to the defense sector at a time of rising food and energy prices, inadequate delivery of government services and education, health, civil services, as well as inflation. I think this is also a very important factor. Defense and economic affairs are not mutually exclusive. In fact, if we have a strong economy, it helps our defense, of course. But it means, and I will go, this is a little bit touching the point that General Durrani made, we really have to improve our governance. We have to, I think the keys here are education and infrastructure, and we have to do more there. And of course, political maturity is very much a factor because all these are all areas which impact on governance and they impact on public perceptions within Pakistan and abroad. So at the same time, if we have these generate resources for socio-economic and technological development, this enhances the resource base for our civil nuclear program, our defense and nuclear capability as well. Then there is a more specialized critique that since we have a nuclear capability to deter, less should be spent on conventional defense. Well, the point is, if you want to keep your nuclear threshold high, you still have to have a strong conventional defense. I mean, how to get the mix right is a very important question, and we have to continually deal with this and structurally try to adjust day to day on this. Then there's a minority view that the nuclear capability is not required to deter India, and the alternative view that it is inadequate to deter India because they will continue to have much larger weapons stockpiles now and in the future. But I think there again the psychological factor is very important. If the Indians are convinced that if we have to, we will use them, that is the real deterrence, not the number of weapons that you have, and General Durrani has referred to that as well. Then there are the CBM talks with India, nuclear and conventional. The Indians have been trying to de-link themselves from Pakistan and how to get them more engaged in this matter so that they realize that it's in their self-interest and their world image if they have better relations with Pakistan. This is a very major issue, and it speaks not to nuclear and conventional CBMs, which are how to manage a difficult relationship, but the more important structural relations, as is in our strategic research regime, this dispute resolution on Kashmir, the water issues. All these issues are very core issues, are very important. Very little has been done about them in the last round of talks before the new round of peace dialogue or composite dialogue has begun. But I think we have to keep a watch on that. Then, of course, there's a public articulation of our nuclear strategy. For some, while we may say that we don't need to articulate it, but nonetheless, I don't see any harm that we should do it. We have different statements which we've done all the time that we will only use it if absolutely necessary. It's totally defensive. We will never use it against nuclear states, etc. I think we have to articulate our nuclear strategy, and it's time we did so. We don't have to be defensive about it, and we don't have no first use. I think when I used to negotiate these things with the Indians or discuss nuclear strategy, they would point out on the website they have this nuclear strategy and read it out. And I say the contours of our nuclear strategy are very much the same as they are with any other country. The only difference is we don't have a no first use doctrine, which is natural because we would tend then to give them a certain advantage with their conventional advantage. And whenever they talk about no first use, we always say, well, we should have a no war pact, and therefore no first use of force at all. And then now lastly, what is the correlation of the enhanced Indian capacity, thanks to the US-India deal, the NSG exemption, to our stance in disarmament fora, particularly in the Conference of Disarmament and in international efforts towards an FMCT? I think here, of course, the core thing is that the US-India deal has left 8 Indian power reactors out of safeguards, and these 8 power reactors have a capacity of some 2,000 megawatts electrical, and this would give India capacity, if they run them at 60%, to produce 240 nuclear weapons a year. So let's say the FMCT starts today. I think there's a point we don't tend to make. Within a year that the FMCT may be finalized, I don't think it will take 2 years. Well, let's say if it takes 2 years, even in 1 year, they would be able to make 240 additional nuclear weapons. I mean, that's a fact. And in our own case, while we've had a uranium enrichment capacity potential for a long time, and we've been using it, our plutonium production potential or capacity has been very late in development. I think this is a fault of the Atomic Energy Commission and our policy planners. They could have done this at the same time as enrichment. But anyhow, and of course, when people say that our stockpile or our plutonium power plants, dedicated things are increasing very fast, the point is if you start off with 0 and you go to 1, it looks like 100%. So actually our capacity for plutonium, for miniaturization, is far behind other countries because we started very late. And as you can see, the Indians are very far ahead. And apart from the 8 power reactors left outside safeguards, they also have 13 breeder reactors planned, which will increase this. And then they have very small reserves of uranium. And thanks to the NSG exemption, we now have a situation where other countries will give them uranium, like Australia probably, Kazakhstan, etc., which means that they can use their limited 70,000 tons of proven and possible reserves for their own nuclear program, dedicated program if they wish. I have given, for those who are interested, a small table of the 8 Indian reactors showing how many nuclear weapons they can make if they run at 60%. 100% is only a sort of theoretical maximum, or if they run for power and for weapons production, because these are natural uranium reactors, which heavy water, where you can online refuel them. And if you run them for both power and for making weapons, perhaps you could make at least 100 nuclear weapons a year. So that's the kind of overhang that we have. And added to that is the fact that if you look at the International Panel of Fissile Material report of 2010, where there's 2 prominent Indian scientists are there, and 1 Pakistani for that matter at Princeton, they have calculated that the overhang of unsafeguarded plutonium in India is 6.8 tons. And they have said that even if this is, as they assess, basically reactor-grade plutonium from India's reactors over the last so many years, from this you can make 840 nuclear weapons. People think that you can't make nuclear weapons out of reactor-grade plutonium. That's not true. But the real fact is that we don't know how much of this plutonium is reactor-grade, how much of it is weapons-grade. So India has, according to the IPFM, plutonium from its dedicated reactors, weapons-making reactors, for 140 nuclear weapons. Maybe an under-assessment given, the Indian authors. It has 850 nuclear weapons from its unsafeguarded reactor-grade plutonium, and some of which I believe could well be weapons-grade plutonium, and it has the potential to produce a lot more, or maybe producing a lot more pretty fast. The history of the FMCT has been quite checkered. In 1946, the Americans came up with this idea, and then with the Baruch Plan, then Eisenhower proposed this in 1956. The Soviets opposed this till 1993, and till 1989. And when Gorbachev accepted this in 1989, the Americans opposed it because it would limit their nuclear deterrent. And this off and on thing kept on going. Finally, Ambassador Shannon was appointed to help the CD. He had his mandate where he said that a treaty must be verifiable and stocks are an important issue. A committee was formed in 1995 which met only 3 times in the Conference of Disarmament. But then there was no further movement, and the US NATO bombing of the Chinese embassy and the ABM's decision by the United States made Russia and China harden its position, and they said that unless the Prevention on Arms Race in Outer Space was negotiated simultaneously, they wouldn't go in for the FMCT. Pakistan and India were also asked by America to sign the FMCT, to have an FMCT and a CTBT. After that, there was a resolution in the UNGA condemning their nuclearization and retaliation. Both countries also rejected the FMCT. For a short time, Pakistan in 1989 said that we could have a look at this issue, but then, as I said, after this UN resolution, it backed off from that. The Americans came up with an FMCT treaty, but it was not verifiable. It said that it would not be verifiable, so this didn't help matters. And then finally, in 2007, the 6 CD presidents came up with a take it or leave it program of work, which we rejected. In 2009, they came up with another program of work, which we accepted, saying that it would depend on the elaboration of the program of work, which should give equal importance to the other 3 core issues: the nuclear disarmament, negative security guarantees, and the prevention of an arms race in outer space. This they were not willing to do. So when we had the elaboration of the work document in 2009, we gave specific amendments saying that all 4 core issues should be negotiated in the same way, not just the FMCT. The objective must be for treaties for all 4. This was not acceptable to the Americans and to the Western countries, and therefore the impasse began again in the CD, which has remained up to now. There have been threats that they would take it outside the Conference on Disarmament, but I think these are empty threats, because if that happens, then people will take the Convention against Nuclear Weapons, which is far more far-reaching than the FMCT, also outside the CD, and that is not in the interests of the P4 and the Western countries as such. And basically our approach on the FMCT has been based on 5 basic considerations. 1, the objective is not just disarmament, not just non-proliferation, but disarmament. 2, that it must address existing stocks. And to maintain strategic deterrence in South Asia, we have to look at India's fissile stocks. And unless these stockpiles are accounted for, it could be used for the development of additional nuclear weapons. Asymmetries at the global and regional level will constitute a factor of strategic instability. So therefore, if you have a cutoff, it must also have a program for the elimination of asymmetries. And it is the responsibility of the larger states with the largest stockpiles to start transferring these stockpiles into safeguards first. And then a treaty without verification will have no teeth. And that's very, very, very important for all treaties. And that a treaty must be non-discriminatory. It must address stockpiles. Otherwise, a flawed instrument would end up freezing asymmetries and causing discrimination. Fifthly, that the CD should negotiate all the core issues at the same time. So now, taking into account this brief overview that I've given, which those who are interested can read it, and the thrust of the discussions here today from our chairman, General Durrani, and Professor Jaspal, I would recommend to all of you the main conclusions and recommendations of this seminar, which will be of relevance to our position in the CD, to the government, and to public perceptions. They should be the following. 1, Pakistan's nuclear program is a vital element of Pakistan's national security. 2, I've written these down, so if anybody wants to read them. 2, Pakistan is a responsible nuclear state with a command, control, and security system second to none, along with a strong strategic export controls, all subject to internal monitoring, review, and improvement if required. The safety and security of Pakistan's nuclear program and assets from any internal or external threat are beyond doubt. 3. Pakistan participates in many UN, IEA, and other international initiatives concerned with nuclear safety and security as well as non-proliferation, which further demonstrates its commitment and ability. 4. Some critical perceptions are motivated while others are due to misperceptions. Through engagement, it should be attempted to correct these misperceptions. 5. The civil power generation nuclear program, in which all the civil power reactors are under IEA safeguards, is essential to Pakistan's energy security as a fossil fuel deficit country dependent on energy imports for its socio-economic development. 6. The power generation component of this program must be advanced to meet Pakistan's growing energy requirements. As this civil nuclear power generation is based on IEA safeguarded reactors, it should not be subject to any external discriminatory technological denial policies. 7. In view of Pakistan's experience and expertise in the safe operation of nuclear reactors and facilities, the establishment of the requisite infrastructure and regulatory regimes, component manufacturing, nuclear safety, as well as export controls, Pakistan is well placed for international partnerships in the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. In this regard, Pakistan should explore avenues of cooperation with other countries planning their safeguarded civil nuclear programs. 8. Under the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission, Pakistan has long-standing academic and training programs as well as medical and agricultural nuclear research and treatment centers and facilities. Peaceful uses cooperation with other countries for their civil nuclear programs and for agricultural, medical research and treatment can also be explored under the IEA and OIC auspices. 10. Pakistan's strategic nuclear program based on credible minimum nuclear deterrence is essential to maintain peace and security in this region. It is not aimed at any country and it is purely defensive and to deter any aggression or adventurism. Minimum deterrence is not static and without entering into an arms race has to evolve to meet and to counter emerging threats to Pakistan's security. 11. It is unfortunate that rather than discussing and partnering Pakistan's long-standing offer of a strategic restraint regime in South Asia based on nuclear restraint, conventional balance, and dispute resolution, India has moved in the other direction in terms of its strategic capabilities, conventional build-up, and aggressive doctrines. 12. It is also unfortunate that many members of the international community, rather than supporting strategic restraint in South Asia, have bolstered India's strategic and conventional capabilities and assets. The US-India nuclear deal and the exemption by the NSG, without placing all of India's power reactors, ambitious breeder reactor program, and sizable fissile material stocks from these power reactors under safeguards, is a clear violation of these countries' NPT obligations. 13. The provision by Russia to India of nuclear submarines in the past, without any safeguards on their reactors, and now nuclear attack submarines capable of carrying nuclear-armed ballistic missiles, constitutes violations of Russia's NPT obligation. Russia's cooperation in the production of the BrahMos cruise missile is also a violation of Russia's MTRC obligation. 14. Under the US-India nuclear deal, the 8 heavy water reactors which are ideal for weapon-grade protection have been left outside safeguards. Their capacity at 2,000 megawatts electrical at 60% capacity can produce 1,200 kg of weapons-grade plutonium, enough for 240 nuclear weapons. There is no precedent for keeping reactors outside safeguards. Similarly, 15, the ambitious breeder reactor program adds to this plutonium capacity, weapons capacity, and since the objective of breeder reactors is to extend fissile material for power production, there is no justification either for keeping them outside IAEA safeguards. The Indian Prime Minister has stated in Parliament that no facet of India's nuclear program of strategic significance will be placed under safeguard. This makes it clear that those aspects, those parts of the India's program which are kept out of safeguards have strategic objectives and therefore implications for the region and beyond. 17. The International Panel on Fissile Material in its 2000 publication, Reducing and Eliminating Nuclear Weapons, Country Perspectives on the Challenge to Nuclear Disarmament, says that the Indian current stockpile of weapons-grade plutonium is estimated at 700 kg, sufficient for 140 fission weapons, and 6.8 tons of reactor-grade plutonium, sufficient for 850 fission weapons. While this is not widely known, reactor-grade plutonium can be used for nuclear weapons. Furthermore, a significant proportion of this stockpile is likely to be weapon-grade plutonium, as predicted by a recently published American assessment made before 1974, when it stated that just from the 2 reactors then under construction, India would be able to produce some 50 to 60 nuclear weapons. This is sort of a point which I think the government of Pakistan has never made in the CD or outside, and I think it's good that the seminar brings this to their notice. 19. The United States of America and the NSG should have made it a condition for any exemptions to India that all its power and breeder reactors, fissile material stockpiles should be under safeguards before provision of any technology, additional nuclear power, and uranium supplies. Equal treatment should have been given to Pakistan. An opportunity to introduce strategic restraint into South Asia was missed. Rather than profess non-proliferation objectives and NPT obligations, the motivation has been to build up India's strategic capabilities plus commercial considerations of profit. 20. Pakistan is therefore faced with a grave asymmetry of fissile material stocks and aggressive Indian proactive or cold start doctrine aimed at seizing Pakistani territory, development of an Indian nuclear triad through the introduction of ballistic missile carrying submarines, the continued induction of other new lethal weapon systems, introduction of ABMs with the cooperation of the United States, Russia, and Israel, and a growing differential in terms of conventional armaments and capabilities, facilitated by countries who call for better relations between Pakistan and India, but whose action on the ground are not in sync. 21. These developments have significant implications for Pakistan's security. 22. The seminar expresses full support for Pakistan's position at multilateral disarmament fora and for its principal position in the Conference of Disarmament, which must be maintained. 23. In the Conference of Disarmament, Pakistan must continue to insist that only a fissile material treaty, FMT, which addresses existing fissile material stocks and asymmetries to assure equal security for all, should be negotiated. This would be a true disarmament objective and achievement, not an FMCT aimed at the expense of only Pakistan, the last entrant which was forced by the Indian nuclear tests and subsequent threats to go nuclear to preserve the strategic balance essential for peace and security in South Asia. This should be in the context of parallel negotiations of equal status with the same objective to reach legal instruments on the 3 other core issues before the CD: nuclear disarmament, negative security guarantees, and the prevention of an arms race in outer space. The Group of 21, in its statement of 11th August 2011 at the CD plenary, which demonstrated that Pakistan is not isolated in the CD, inter alia called for a consensus on a comprehensive, balanced program of work, taking into account the security concern of all states, the early commencement of negotiations within the CD on a phased program for the complete elimination of nuclear weapons within a specific period of time, including a nuclear weapon convention to prohibit the possession, development, stockpiling, transfer, and use of nuclear weapons, leading to their ultimate destruction. Such a convention goes far beyond any status quo FMCT proposal, and the NPT nuclear powers, to fulfill their NPT vertical deproliferation obligation, should agree to demonstrate their sincerity. Finally, point 24, Pakistan, a responsible nuclear state, supports the objectives of non-proliferation and should continue to contribute to the strengthening and further development of the international non-proliferation regime based on the principles of non-discrimination, equal and undiminished security for all states, and equal access to peaceful uses of nuclear energy. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tariq, both for the wide area you have covered, but more specifically for the very concrete and very pertinent recommendations which really would help our negotiating team to not only present Pakistan viewpoint effectively, but also take some fresh initiatives where a new restraint regime could come into existence. But this has to be based on justice and protection of interests of all and not merely of a few. We have now about half an hour for questions and short comments from the floor. I understand that we have a very distinguished number of participants. I would love to give everyone an opportunity, but because of time constraint, my humble request is that please try to be brief and specific and identify yourself, and also please clarify whether you are asking a question from any of the panelists or you are making a short comment.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I would say that all three presentations were excellent. I am Dr. Mohammed Khan from National Defense University. Indeed, thought-provoking presentations. My brief question, some comment would be that all three panelists, they have talked about the minimum credible deterrence. General Durrani talked about whether it is a threat. It is a threat. It's a challenge, as a matter of fact, that whether the level of the deterrence is acceptable to the enemy. That is so much is the credibility of deterrence. Dr. Jaspal said that perhaps we need to reconcile. We need to reconcile this theory of the minimum credible deterrence. And Ambassador Tariq Osman Hyder, he said that in the recommendation, as a matter of fact, that our nuclear program is based on minimum credible deterrence. And my point would be that what level we are suggesting to the government on the nuclear authority that minimum credible deterrence should be there. Number one. And number two, we have a misperception, as amply highlighted by Ambassador Tariq Osman Hyder. How to do away with these misperceptions, because after a week or 10 days, or with a pause of maximum 2 weeks, we get a new propaganda against the Pakistan nuclear program, whether it is safety and security, mind control, or some sort of a terrorist weapon would be in the hands of the terrorists and all that. How to do away with these misperceptions?
Thank you very much. And Zulfani, I would like you to respond. Again, please be as precise.
This discussion on credible minimum deterrence will go on forever.
Yes, right.
Because we cannot put a number. I think the dynamics of the number has already been, I'll just give 2 or 3 keywords. Sanity in the country, meaning thereby people are serious, they don't want to use it. But at the same time, I'm not suggesting that the madness that Kissinger talked about, that has to be displayed. A little resolution, sometimes a desperation, doing everything possible that you're not doing it, but at the same time showing enough confidence that if God forbid it comes to that the national will would be available. So this is the framework. How to make it happen is an evolving process.
Thank you, Professor Saab. I promised to be very brief when I spoke to Dr. Khalid Rahman. I have 2 questions. One is about the domestic challenges to the nuclear program. The domestic situation was mentioned very casually, or it was actually completely sort of ignored by my brother Jaspal. The second is about the regional challenge. So I'm going to ask questions. The questions are meant for intellectuals. First, let me be very candid. A nation which cannot manage traffic mess of its capital and other cities, and a nation, sir, this is particularly for Professor Kushid, a nation which cannot manage peaceful transfer of power from one government to the other since 1947. How can it meet challenges, security challenges and challenges to Pakistan's nuclear program? Because you have to base your policy on your domestic situation. That's one question for intellectuals of Pakistan. How can we manage our serious security issues without putting our own house in order? That's number one. Number two, the regional challenge of India in particular. Now, if we maintain this confrontation, the traditional confrontation with India, we either go on raising the level of our minimum deterrence, creating more and more weapons, and then both countries can turn South Asia into a nuclear minefield or a nuclear volcano, Is it possible for intellectuals to promote some kind of relaxation between India and Pakistan so that we can bring down the level of temperature and move towards some kind of a South Asian identity? Thank you very much.
Thanks. As to your first question, I think there is no disagreement that we have to set our house in order. From traffic, transport to global issues. There is no running away from that. But this is also a fact that despite all these failures, which should not be covered up, we have been able to survive, we have been able to grow, and we have been able to become a nuclear weapon state. There are both sides to the coin, and without minimizing the need for developing Pakistan as a viable, progressive, developing state, the issue of nuclear security and its threat perceptions and how to be ready to face them is very important, cannot be ignored, and we cannot wait for everything to improve to look into the security dimension. As to the other question, I will request Ambassador Tariq to respond to that.
Thank you. Well, I think your other question was about India and South Asia. Yes. Well, I think everybody is in agreement that we want to have good relations with India. We want to have good relations with Afghanistan. The question really here is that are the Indians ready to have good relations with us? I think they would like to manage their relations with us so that we are in a kind of a subservient position, or we don't really raise our heads. If they were more broad-minded, or they were able to engage with us on Kashmir meaningfully and do something about the human rights violations there and the aspirations of the Kashmiri people, which we can't forget either, the situation would be different. So it takes two to tango. I think this is the sort of question it would be good that you address to the Indians, because we are a smaller country. There's hardly anything we can do to the Indians. Thank you.
Then Durrani would like to...
Nuclearization is not necessarily, not per se, against reconciliation. In fact, whether we take NER's East-West confrontation of the bloc politics or India-Pakistan, the serious dialogue on conflict resolution, formation of this framework to resolve our conflicts and make peace started when the nuclearization was already known. Before that, it didn't happen.
Thank you. Yes, just.
Dr. Jaspal, would you agree with me if I say, I'm sorry to introduce myself, Dr. Tariq Osman Hyder, Islamabad. That the world has entered a third nuclear age because the United States has signed an agreement with India. Second, that what can the intellectuals do to convince the Americans that they are going on a path of terrible, stupidity, to have more than 35,000 nuclear weapons after the disintegration of Soviet Union. Third, that after looking at the safe and positive use of nuclear energy, what happened in Japan, and consequently the Germans have started closing down their positive energy reactors because even positive aspect is so damaging. So that is it's something that they are playing with fire. Now, and all the three speakers said nothing about the Israeli, aspect of nuclear weapons. And Dr. Jaspal, would you kindly speak more on the what you said about Iran regarding India in this particular field?
Thank you very much. Dr. Zafar.
Thank you. I think that I don't want to annoy someone when I said on the Iran, I made a point. Let me start with this. In my presentation, maybe you forget, I very categorically said Israel's nuclear weapons program, it is the biggest hindrance in making Middle East nuclear weapon free zone. That is one thing. Second, now coming towards the second, my point was, yes, Iran is a member of the NPT. It has a right to use the nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. But under Article 3, 4, 5 of the treaty, which it had willfully joined, it has also a responsibility to ensure the international community that this program is not misused. Then that is their own debate. But when I was making a reference, from Chabahar, Kandahar, Zaidan Road, when it will be built, definitely I'm not against it, but it brings a stress on me. When from Chabahar to Haji Kag in Afghanistan, 60 miles from the Kabul, the railway track will be built, it will be a strategic competitor. I am not looking the world with this concept that he's my brother or he's my sister. I am looking the world with a very realist paradigm. I am looking my country where its significance. In that context, I was saying that for me, both these two ventures are not problematic. But for me, the venture which happened in 2003, in November, when Iran and India signed a defense pact, that makes a concern. India is strategic partner of the Israel, America. Iran has a strategic conflict with Israel and America. India has a strategic contest with China. Iran has a strategic partnership. Where there is consensus developed, Iranian forces are doing military exercises with the Indian side. So Iran is my neighbor. Today it is a very good friend. Among the brothers, fights takes place in our systems. So we should be careful whether my brother is having a good gun or a bad gun. I should be always expecting good things, but I should be not ignorant. That was my point when I was talking about regional strategic architectures, security architecture. Second point, when you say that it was mentioned that these Germans will be giving up in the near future their reliance on the nuclear energy. They are maybe in a search of new alternative. They didn't stop. They just gave up after the Fukushima, and frankly, Fukushima generated a radiation, but there is no casualty. This is more hip. And of course, the safety mechanisms will be further improved, but at the same time, Japan itself is going to operate. Just see the latest reports on it. World is building on it. We have casualties at a number of the incidents. For example, hydel power. It generates water logging. So can we give up hydel power? Similarly, accident. I came here, I'm going out, 50% chances whether I will be survived on the road or not. But can I give up the car driving? So we have to be very careful when we talk about these energies or these sort of security sort of things. Finally, point is, I use the word that world is entering into the fourth medium of warfare. If you are talking about by fourth medium, I mean, first medium was historically land warfare. Second medium was naval warfare, maritime warfare when the ships were made. Third medium was aerospace warfare. And now we are inching towards the fourth medium warfare, that is space warfare. Space has been used for military purposes, but space has not been used for weaponization. So that's why we say it has been already militarized, but not weaponized. But with this reference which I just gave, Americans are not confirming it, but somewhere they spend this, they can throw this light, yes, we are working. Because I work myself on missile defense system, and my all calculation indicates that if you have an interceptor on the grounds, you need a territory of the other states. Like India and Americans have understanding of Himalayas will be used for interceptors to check the Chinese. So if you have a space, then you have no reliance. So naturally, state like America is not ready to depend. If you see in the case of NATO, Romania, Czech Republic, Poland, Turkey, they are giving them space. But the threat they are posing them that coming from Iran. But Turkey has nothing to do with Iran. They have a good relation nowadays. So by this way, we have to be very careful that when we talk about technological evolution, especially in the military sector, there I can always look about this historical evolution of the weapons. I give a common example, that is gunpowder, invented in 10th century, used in 13th century, changed the warfare in 15th century. So nuclear was invented 65, 70 years behind, earlier. So we have to wait when it will be a battlefield weapon and how we are looking it. So whether it's a good or bad, that is a different thing. Killing is bad, but state when kills, you say it's punishing. So that is the point.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. I thank all participants for their excellent presentation. The recommendation made by Ambassador Tariq Osman Hyder are very valid and I think thought-provoking. But I just want to make one point. I'm Rudy Khurshid from National Defense University. I just want to make one point that unless you speak from a position of strength, nobody is going to listen to you. And at the moment, unfortunately, the Pakistani ambassadors across the world, they are not speaking from a position of strength. They are very weak because, as pointed out by Jaspal, that economic meltdown, maybe by design or by default, is the main problem with Pakistan. Unless we have a very strong economic background, unless we have a reliance on our own, even taking a position on FMCT in the CD will be a very, very tough job and challenging job in future. Although we have taken a principled stance that we will not let FMCT to move forward in isolation, but for how long you can sustain this pressure if your house is not in order. So I just want to make one point that you have to be very strong internally. So if you want to speak from a position of strength, your economic meltdown is a bigger hurdle in that way. So we have to look in that particular area. Thank you, sir.
I have two questions which I would request Ambassador Hyder to address, and I would an observation also. I'll first come with the observation. My observation is that we may have a very friendly relationship with India. We may remove all our differences, but I don't think that's going to persuade them to control or restrain their nuclear program, because their ambitions are beyond this region. Their ambitions are global, regional and global. They are not solely directed to Pakistan. And now the questions, Pakistan is singled out as probably the sole dissenting voice in FMCT. Although, as you mentioned, FMCT has a checkered history, and many countries in the past have been objecting in changing their stance also. So, even at present, there must be a number of countries who have their own reservations against FMCT. Why can't Pakistan persuade them to join their voices and come up with a sort of stance which is not seen as a sole stance of Pakistan? And about the Indo-nuclear deal, again, I must say that the Indo-nuclear deal, although in our threat perception it is a real threat to us because of our relations with India, but I think it is more targeted against China than against Pakistan. So is it not possible for us to join hands with China and persuade China to take a stance on this deal as well as generally on Pakistan? And there are other countries also who have their reservations, like Japan, like Australia, who could be requested.
Thank you. Well, I'll be very brief. Thank you. I think on FMCT, the reality is we're not isolated, but I mean, there are different people. The Israelis are very happy with us, the Indians are happy with us, the Iranians are happy with us, even the Chinese, I think, are happy with it. But the question is, they let us do the heavy lifting, and then they don't get any of the flack, so why do they come in front? We tried in 2009 to withdraw a little back so that other people will come in front, then we ended up with a difficult situation and having to backtrack. Yes, of course, the India-US deal is to build up India also against China, but 95% of their forces are raged against Pakistan. The Chinese are obviously aware of this, and they have been supportive in the CD, and they've always said that the security concerns of all states have to be taken in place. And this reference I gave to you of the group of 21 countries in the CD, their statement on the 11th of November 2011 in the CD, that all four things have to be taken at the same place, and that statement is a little bit long, also said that the security concerns of all countries have to be on board. It shows that we are not isolated. I think this is the thing. Thank you.
Thank you. May I? Just, please. We are running out of time, so please be very brief.
I will be very short. I'm Brigadier Nazir and basically help from FATA. My observation is regarding the viable state. I suppose the viable leadership, which is the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, one has forced down the confession of proliferation of the nuclear scientists, and it has provided a well around the neck of Pakistan to be used against it. The second Supreme Commander, no first use, and then India is not our enemy number one. So these are three goals against our nuclear deterrence or prohibition. My suggestion regarding the residence in the space and in the range and in the time dimension, I suppose that is the most prudent factor where your nuclear deterrence prevail around the world once your range is enhanced and you are in the time and space dimension. And lastly, I must say that on the minimum nuclear deterrence, I suppose it is a double intended for the reason that saturation of space is one of the strategic terms. And if this is saturation of nuclear weapons, that also becomes very dangerous. And there are so many risks which you invite. So for the number, we should not be so much worried rather than for the quality.
Thank you very much.
No, I think in principle one would agree.
Yeah.
This is the way these things have to be handled and followed. So it's a continuous challenge.
Now,
Thank you, my name is Mohammed Ali, IIT FMU. Thank you for a very enlightening, informed discussion. I just wanted to bring to the attention of the panel and also for the benefit of the audience a couple of points which endorses the points highlighted by Dr. Jaspal, that the significance of space, that dimension is evolving and that is going to affect not just the nuclear but all the other dimensions as well. Because increasingly as we are becoming more technology dependent in naval warfare, in conventional warfare, in cyberspace, but also in for nuclear command and control, for remote sensing satellites, even for guiding your cruise missiles, you are dependent on satellites. Only recently, China has announced, and I'm sure some of you are aware, deploying 20 more satellites this year alone. And they want to have their own system of guidance parallel with GPS. So they want to be to have their sort of technology autonomy, so that they are not dependent on US satellites. Similarly, Russia is also developing its own autonomous guidance system, GLONASS. So we should also look in that direction and collaborating probably with China or doing whatever we can with our modest resources. One more point is that that I wanted any of the very illustrious panelists to respond to is the economic dimension. Ambassador Saab is well aware when we recommended the strategic restraint regime, and somehow the Indians were not very receptive on that. But the point is that we see a steady and regular pattern and trend in which different powerful states, France, Russia, Japan, Australia, America, they are collaborating with India in strategic areas, dual use items. We see accommodation into MTCR and other areas, and Indo-US nuclear deal is just one symbolic manifestation of that trend, and that is expected to continue from a realist paradigm. So what options do we have? Because that growing strategic and technological cooperation that the major powers are having with the Indians is likely to continue for their own economic and technological, probably even strategic reasons. So what options do we actually have at the diplomatic level, at fora like CD, and also in terms of our strategy? Thank you.
Thank you. As far as your first point is concerned, definitely it is a very challenging area, and we have to see how we, in collaboration with our friends, can go into that. Second point, I would like Ambassador Tariq to respond quickly.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's very valid. The point is, I don't think that the economic disparity matters so much in the CD. We take a position there, we maintain it in that case. Unless, as General Durrani said, we have a meltdown and there's a price or something like that. But I think the thing is, obviously, we have to put our house in order and improve our economy. You know, in the army, they used to say you have a 1 to 3 defense ratio. India is 7 times larger, so in fact, we have to spend 280% more per person than them. So we have to grow our economy faster, or we have to sacrifice more. That's the choice we've always faced. If, for instance, if we had money to buy nuclear reactors, instead of getting them on credit from the Chinese, I think there would be more receptivity in other countries to do that. So I think here it's not a question of what we can do diplomatically. We have to improve our economy, we have to export more, etc. That's the basic thing. Thank you.
Just
very briefly, I mean, this is also actually at the philosophical level. If the other side is going that way, don't follow that particular way which you cannot afford. Avoid Soviet Union. Go low tech. When it is the drones and all the rest of the brass on the American side, the Taliban can win.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. In fact, I missed some of the presentations, the wonderful presentation you made, and timely. But I'm a little concerned that when you say the challenges to Pakistan's nuclear program, no speaker mentioned the American threat. Because I look at it, the most grave challenge to the Pakistan nuclear program will come from that direction, and also Israel. And people are talking about Iranian situation. If that develops, what happens to the Pakistan nuclear program? Is there a serious threat that emerges from the combines of United States, Israel, India? That is one. And I also have the observation, recommendations. These are the seminar recommendations. They are part of the combined some of it. Thank you very much.
I think you're quite right. You came late and so missed out. Overall framework. One did touch upon that, that if there is a very high technological threat, then one will have to think about. I think just now Muhammad Ali's question also partially taken care of, but at that time one said, what is it that we must do if that is the type of capability that one has? You and I know that regardless of whatever the threat is, we know how to find out a viable option. It doesn't always have to be a conventional one.
Please.
We have to make a very clear thing. If I make a program, despite all the opposition and sanctions, we are capable to protect it, and that's why nuclear weapon state should act confidently, not in anxiety. That's why we do not mention that, oh, this threat, that is exaggeration. Number one, frankly speaking, when I look about the Americans' capability, it's difficult for them to denuclearize us, number one. Number two, yes, there is a threat which they do, like I said, that they are trying to put a pressure on Pakistan, diplomatic. And that was, we will be going to see a pressure in the Conference of Disarmament because of our non-affirmity or not accepting their agendas. Second is that when I look about, I said, they are not directly hitting you. They are building India. And India is going to encircle you. That we mentioned it. So if we are simply alleging it that he is doing that thing is doing, I think we are a nuclear weapon state. We have a strong deterrence. We have a capabilities. We should also be very careful when we are trying to analyzing and alleging or generating our perception. Thank you.
Thanks. Dr. Qureshi. I have another 2 minutes only. Please try to be very brief.
I'm trying to make it in a half minute. First of all, I must say that it was very interesting seminar. I mainly want to congratulate Ambassador Tariq Osman Hyder. He was very precise, and this is one thing that I want to appreciate, that he made concrete suggestions on what we should do. And it was not on theories and discussing other countries and this and that. We must take it for granted that any proposal in the international community that is made on the nuclear program relates first to Pakistan. It is an attack on Pakistan, and then it might be on North Korea or Iran. But the main target is Pakistan. And I would like, whenever these seminars are held, that more emphasis is paid to the national interest of Pakistan, and all the debate that on international level is done on nuclear program is then viewed from the angle of Pakistan. Pakistan is one of the most important countries of the region, and the intention is now, the lines are drawn that the group of countries to which Pakistan belongs are on the target of the big powers. Now, as far as the big powers are concerned, they go in kind of sophistry with Hiroshima blood and Afghanistan blood and Iraq blood and Korea blood and Vietnam blood. Now they become so holistic that it is, we should completely ignore it, and we should only concentrate on what they need about Pakistan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this observation.
Qazi Humayun, former Minister of Pakistan. Pakistan's nuclear program has enjoyed a national consensus by and large, but we see that of late there are cracks appearing in that consensus. One was the statement made at the highest level that no first use of nuclear weapons. The second is the reduction in the funding allocated to our nuclear program on a current basis. Professor Khurshid, this question is addressed to you. How do we, because these are challenges at the political level, how do you think, being a member of a political party, a senator, how do you think this challenge can be prevented or addressed at the political level? Thank you very much.
This last one. Sorry, the time problem.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'm Dr. Fissile from I'm thankful for IPS for inviting me. And the topic is challenges to Pakistan nuclear program and threats. It's a burning issue. The security, sovereignty of the country is involved. And I'm thankful for the illustrious and prominent scholars for sharing their views. The matter is this, recently, Pakistanians approached the American authorities through Hussain Khan and Mansoor Ejaz that we are not capable to protect our nuclear program and we need your help. That's in black and white, still that's in the courts. There are three threats. One is internal threat, second is regional threat, and third is international threat. How we can face and we can control the same.
Thank you. My very sincere apologies to those of my colleagues whom I could not give the floor because of the time constraint. And I hope this is an ongoing process, and inshallah in the future those dimensions which could not be covered today, we will try to take care of that. First of all, I would like to thank the panelists and the participants for a very high level but realistic analysis and discussion, and also some very concrete suggestions, both for the diplomatic front as well as the policy level. The first point I would like to share with you, and I think it reflects your thinking also, is that our first responsibility is to build our own country. Security is important. Resources needed for security should be provided. But security can really be taken care of in the context of both political stability and economic strength. History tells us that whenever equation between economic and military power has changed, and economy is not in a position to support the security dimension, countries have slipped into oblivion. So the economic basis and the political stability both are extremely important. First priority must be given to them. Second point that emerges is that for Pakistan, nuclear deterrence is a must. There had been national consensus, and I am sure there is national consensus, irrespective of the few voices that have been unfortunately raised. This is part of the price we have to pay for freedom. But the national conscience has never accepted that, and such observations from however high-ups have come, they have been challenged and they have dissolved into thin air. Because our independence, our sovereignty, our identity, they are the most important concerns, and on those, inshallah, we will never make any compromise. The concept of nuclear deterrence, the minimum nuclear deterrence, has come up again and again. I think it's a very real issue. It's not a game of numbers. It depends upon the changing threat situation. And unless we are conscious of the threats, the security paradigm has to respond to that. In my view, there is no contradiction between conventional and the nuclear, although they are very closely related, complementary. One cannot substitute the other. Yet, one has to take care of the other, and there are important consequences and implications for the rest. That type of exercise should always be an ongoing exercise. Minimum deterrence is a dynamic phenomenon. And that is why I would like to join my panelists in emphasizing that development is an integral part of that process. Maintenance of status quo and just the idea of safety of the weapons or the assets is only part of the problem. The other part, of course, is the development and the evolution which should always take place. And I think I am not far wrong when I say that if you calculate in terms of the monetary cost of conventional deterrence and nuclear deterrence, the cost of nuclear deterrence was less. And from that viewpoint, we have to keep all these dimensions in view when we are developing our security paradigm and our responses to the threats that are from within as well as from without. I think another very important area which has been rightly touched upon by Dr. Zafar as well as Ambassador Tariq relates to the development of the nuclear technology projects for peaceful purposes. Because of the scare, the targeting that has been done in Pakistan, somehow we have not been able to really explore and avail of the opportunities that exist in this respect. Yes, Fukuyama incident is very tragic, but that does not mean that nuclear source of energy and nuclear technology for other purposes in any way should be written off. And in most of the Western countries, the contribution that nuclear technology for peaceful purposes, particularly energy, is something over 20 to 30%. In Pakistan, it's less than 1%. So I think it's a very important area, and that also enables you to build up the expertise which can have multiple uses. So I think this is another area which has to be kept in view. Finally, I would come to the suggestions which Ambassador Tariq has given. I think they are very valuable contribution of this seminar, and we will try our best to project them, make them available to the policymakers, and I hope that sets the agenda for our diplomats and participants for the forthcoming conference on disarmament. Finally, we must always realize that war is not something that one would like. Yet, security and preparedness to defend yourself is something which can ignore only at our peril. So while I am against the idea of a society being turned into a security state, I firmly believe that security dimension is a pivotal dimension. The defense, the military part of it, and along with that the human and the economic part of it should be taken care of, and that is how in an integrated manner we can safeguard our freedom, protect our sovereignty, and achieve our socio-political ideals of establishing a progressive Islamic welfare state, which on the one hand provides security and opportunity to the people, and on the other plays a role in promoting peace and goodwill in the world. With these thoughts, I thank you once again and request the Director General to conclude and request you to have a cup of tea with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Khurshid, for summing up the seminar. Let me take this opportunity to once again thank all the speakers and all the participants. It was a very good discussion that took place after the presentations. We are not going to stop here. First, we shall be documenting the whole proceeding of today's seminar, and then we shall also be having a series of seminars on the similar subjects, inshallah, in the coming months. I shall be failing in my duty if I don't express my gratitude to IPS team members who have organized this seminar, particularly our coordinator on the nuclear program, Fatima Habib, Mr. Awais Ghani, Mr. Ali Yusufzai, and our administrative team. We are going to have a program in the evening also, which is a 10-day program, and they are constantly changing different settings for these programs. So our administrative team is also deserve our gratitude. Please join us at tea here in the left side of this hall. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil.